I'm in the presidential palace in Buenos Aires to interview the new president, Javier Milei. Javier Milei went viral during his campaign around the world for campaigning with a chainsaw, which was his symbol for his desire to slash the state and slash public spending. After years of high public spending, high debt, high inflation, he has slashed the value of the currency, slashed subsidies, slashed government departments. He says this radical program of austerity is needed to fix the economy, but lots of people in Argentina are struggling, and he said that things will need to get worse before they get better. He's called himself a libertarian and a narco-capitalist. He hates the state. He loves Elon Musk. He's a big fan of the Rolling Stones. Some of his fans and critics alike have described him as crazy. But who is the real Javier Milei? President Milei, thank you so much for speaking with BBC News today. I'd like to start this interview firstly by talking about the economy, which you've made a priority. You have got inflation down, but you promised that the political class, not the people, would pay. I spoke to a pensioner here who told me that in tears, that this, in her words, was a lie, that with cuts to pensions, salaries, the value of people's money, it's people like her who are paying. What would you say to her?
Bueno, la verdad es que eso es falso.
Well, actually, that is false. The largest adjustment is being paid by the political corporation. When we took office, Argentina's economy had twin deficits amounting to 17% of GDP. Besides, the previous administration during the last year had printed about 13% of GDP to finance fiscal deficit. And when we took office, inflation was at 7,500% a year. And in December, wholesale inflation reached 54%. The most regressive tax that most afflicts people is the inflation.
But with respect, President, most analysts do agree that one of the biggest cuts, one of the ways you have achieved the fiscal surplus is through cutting pensions. It's made up about 35% of the cuts that have been introduced.
I'm aware of the criticism. So let me give you the answers to that unfounded criticism that is leveled against me. The impact on pensions is only 0.4% of GDP. So 90% of the cuts actually fall on the casta and 10% of the cuts on the pensions.
But I want to know specifically, what would you say to people right now? Would you say sorry? Would you say thank you to the people who are having to pay a lot more than they were previously as a result of the adjustment that's happening?
The mass media will deliberately lie, and people will believe those lies they get through the media. Probably the part of the world where the press and journalism is most rotten and pursues political interests is Argentina, where many journalists are liars, downright liars, serial liars.
Do you think women like her, for example, are lying, though, when they say they are now struggling to buy their basic groceries in the shops?
You can't make a macroeconomic evaluation based on the situation of an individual. There you are taking one of the parts rather than the whole. Actually, a particular situation may be influenced by the sort of information that the individual also has access to. And the fact is, those things do happen.
I think, excuse me, President, and with respect, the information people have access to is the prices they're seeing in supermarkets. I mean, for example, do you know how much a litre of milk costs now in Buenos Aires?
Do you know how many goods assets exist within an economy? So you don't do economics based on the price of an individual asset.
But President, I'm sorry, I want to make sure we're speaking in terms that normal people will understand, because our audience, people on the streets here are not economists. How does somebody who has seen the price of milk double since you came to office, what would you say to them specifically, the people who are struggling and say that they feel like they are paying for the adjustment? Even if you believe it is the right one, what would be your message to them right now? How long should they wait specifically, for example, for things to feel better?
Bueno, de hecho, ya en el último mes,
In the last month, salaries started to beat inflation. They went up by 14%. Inflation was 11%. We have doubled the food welfare program, the support program for pregnant women. We have quintupled the amount of assistance for children to continue to study. So the program has a strong social support component.
So would the message, just for those people you've mentioned, would the message be, in simple terms, wait a bit longer? And how long, could you just give me a time frame of how long you'd like people to wait who are struggling right now?
The first thing is that in economics, miracles don't exist. If you try to work a miracle, which would be blasphemous in economics, you end up a lot worse off. What would have been the alternative? To continue to print money like the previous administration that generates inflation and ends up affecting the most vulnerable?
How long would you say that people should wait before you think they will be able to feel better?
In fact, economic indicators are improving. In the last month, salaries beat inflation, and this will continue. So as inflation continues to trend downwards.
So in a year or 2 years?
The recovery process is already underway because if inflation is going down and your salary, your pay is being adjusted according to past inflation, you start winning in real terms. The improvement is already taking place. It's not that we have to wait for anything. As we continue to lower inflation, that happens. There's no magic. This is not a textbook exercise where you just solve a dynamic or static comparative analysis exercise on paper and the problem is gone. Real life needs time. But you can't work miracles. Trying to apply monetary and fiscal policies, like the ones that were pursued until now, before us, led to disaster. So, using fiscal policies like that is the mother of all bad. Argentina, during 103 years of the last 123 years, had a fiscal deficit. From 1901 until now, had 22 crises, of which 20 were the result of fiscal issues. So what you need to do is to compare with the scenario of 15,000% inflation, the 95% poverty, and the 60% extreme poor. You will see that what we have done is wonderful.
I'd like to move on to foreign policy now, if that's okay. You have promised Argentines a roadmap to making the Falklands, known here as Malvinas, Argentine. What specifically does that roadmap look like?
We believe that has to be within the framework of peace. Within the framework of peace. And as a result of a long-term negotiation process, we are not going to relinquish our sovereignty, nor are we going to seek conflict with the United Kingdom. What we aspire to is a solution that involves engaging in dialogue so that, at some point, the Malvinas Islands come back to Argentina.
What makes you think that the UK would agree to that? Because they've been very clear that they do not want to negotiate this.
They might not want to negotiate today. At some later point, they might want to. Many positions have changed over time.
But how will you convince them? What would you use to convince them?
I will try to convince them of the fact that territory belongs to Argentina and that, according to the specification that I use for definition purposes, Argentina has the right to sovereignty over the islands.
What kind of time frame would you offer Argentines for that?
These things are not about setting deadlines when dealing with situations that are not so easily definable. I think it's a long time to go and that this may be approached in the same way as in the case of China and Hong Kong. So something can be done.
So it could be decades.
Yes, of course. You need to think in terms of the mindset of countries, not individuals. The timelines shouldn't be restricted to the lifetime of a human being. A country lives so much longer than an individual, and so this is for the long-term state issues. And we want to pursue solutions through peaceful means. Otherwise, it would be hypocritical. So, we are not going to give up our sovereignty. But if it's not the time to discuss it now, it will be discussed later on. But we will discuss it, and at least we are sincere. We speak openly, and we don't lie. I think that's a much more serious position, and we have a whole lot more issues on the agenda that we can work on. So, I think that's the adult way to do it, and painlessly.
Was it a provocation, in your view, for David Cameron to visit the islands in February?
No.
Why not?
Well, it wasn't. If that territory is now in the possession of the hands of the UK, he has a right to do that. I don't see that as a provocation.
Your foreign minister seemed to be unhappy with his visit. Do you disagree with her on that?
You know, you can interpret things in different ways. I don't see that as a provocation. And, of course, each one of us will defend the interest of our own countries, which is understandable. And I don't see why he couldn't have possibly visited the islands.
And would you still say you also admire Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister during the Falklands War?
I have heard lots of speeches by Margaret Thatcher. She was brilliant. So what's a problem? What is a problem?
I'd like to move on to a different foreign policy topic now. You've positioned yourself as a very close ally to Israel. Do you agree with some of Israel's other close allies, like the United States, that Israel should show some restraint in its conflict at the moment in Gaza?
We defend and support Israel's legitimate right to self-defense. And Israel conducts its operations in keeping with international rules. So, if there are a set of international rules to act in the face of such events, and they are abiding by that, why should this be objected to? It's like if you are in a football game and a player touches the ball with a hand, well, that's a penalty kick. Would you say, no, let's not do the penalty kick because the team that is being given the penalty kick is very powerful? What matters here is justice. You've set the rules of the game. If someone touches the ball, it's a penalty kick, regardless of the beneficiary and who suffers. I think that, provided you respect international guidelines in your actions, there's nothing to be said.
Do you still think that Israel's not committed a single excess in the conflict so far?
Of course, because there hasn't yet been a formal condemnation, as you would expect. When such things happen, when there is a formal condemnation, a serious one, not just an ideological condemnation or one by a noisy group, the conversation won't change then.
What about when 7 aid workers were killed by an Israeli strike in clearly marked vehicles? That was condemned by a lot of nations around the world. Would you consider that an excess?
I would have to look at that in detail and study it.
Do you still plan to move your embassy to Jerusalem?
We intend to move the Argentine embassy in Israel to West Jerusalem.
Moving to the US now, who would you like to win the US election?
Actually, regardless of who wins, I'm an ally of the United States, whether they are Democrats or Republicans.
It was reported that you told Donald Trump at a conference in the US that you wanted him to win, you hoped he would win. Is that true?
Well, actually, I bumped into Donald Trump in a hallway. I get on very well with him, but he was on his way out and I was on my way to the stage for my conference. And we actually ended up running into each other in a hallway. So it wasn't even a formal bilateral meeting. It's just that two people who knew each other said hello to each other. And since we got on very well, there was a very informal chat. No protocol involved.
What do you think of him? Because he spent a lot of money when he was in government. He increased debt. He's a protectionist. He increased tariffs. He doesn't seem to have that much in common with you. What do you think you have in common with him?
What matters most is the fact that he clearly identifies who the enemy is, socialism as the enemy.
I want to turn now to the future. You've campaigned with a chainsaw, as you mentioned. You've modeled your image at times on Elvis, on the Rolling Stones. Do you fear that your reputation as a local, the crazy one, means that some people don't take you seriously? Or do you think that crazy is what this country needs?
Those who are supposed to be sane took the richest country in the world to the country number 140. So, whatever the losers that made our country sink called me, I don't really care about at all. And actually, all those who have called me all sorts of things are now suffering terribly and crying all over the place because I am getting international recognition. And above all things, they look at what I am actually doing. You will not find it easy to see this kind of 180 degrees change like I am doing in favor of a libertarian identity. I really don't care about what all those liars are saying, all those serial liars that criticize me.
I want to ask you, Liz Truss recently said that you were her favorite conservative leader. Do you admire her?
Who?
Liz Truss, la ex primera ministra británica.
I don't have elements to give an opinion, but what in the UK is defined as conservative, well, we libertarians have a lot of common ground with that.
You're a big fan of the Rolling Stones band. What is your favorite song by them and why?
It's very hard to pick a single Rolling Stones song that I like the most. But certainly, I do believe that the one I love is Rip This Joint, which is the second song on side A of disc 1 of the album Exile on Main Street. And that album was recorded in Paris in a basement, while they were escaping the burden of asphyxiating fiscal pressure in the UK. So, this album has a very strong libertarian component in its history. I'm a true fan of the Rolling Stones. I actually had a Rolling Stones tribute band I sang in, so I deeply admire Mick Jagger.
And finally, President, I want to ask a question about the future. So many presidents have said that they will be the one to turn around Argentina's economic woes. What makes you think that you will be able to succeed where so many others have failed to do so?
If I didn't believe that I could do it, I wouldn't be sitting here. The difference vis-a-vis other cases is that I know what needs to be done, how to do it, and I have the courage to do it. But above all things, I have the raw material that others have not had. I am convinced, it is my conviction that we can get over this by espousing the ideas of freedom.
Just to finish, I'd like to return to what we discussed right at the start. What would you say to the people who, despite your conviction, despite your belief that this is the right thing to do, feel that they are personally struggling as a result? What message would you offer them at this difficult time?
We are actually already coming out of the dock. We have avoided damage that would be unprecedented in Argentina's history. We have passed through the bottom, and now we are starting to recover. It won't be immediate. It will take time, and people are starting to see the results because inflation is really coming down. Risk has fallen a lot. The prices of Argentine financial assets are on the rise. Some sectors are already expanding. In addition, the salaries are winning against inflation. So, a better future is getting closer.
President Milei, thank you very much for talking to us at BBC News.
Por favor, un placer.
It's been my pleasure.
Placer enorme.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you.